forgot to put a no that I'm in session on.
You're good. Do what you got to do there. We have got a great guest we're going to talk to here in just a few seconds. She is going to join us here on our big broadcast. And we have got quite the deal today. It is just all sorts of fun. We have got Leslie Corbly. I hope I didn't butcher that last name.
You did. You did great.
Okay. Because a lot of times I do, because I'm, of course, Cheeky Jaguar, the ugly American. But that just seems to be what for whatever reason, I butcher people's names. And it's just part of my charm, I guess. But Leslie is with us today. She is the author of Progressive Prejudice, Exposing the Devouring Mother. She's also an author, columnist, poet, and an attorney, which is amazing. I always love talking to attorneys because attorneys know the law. They know the actual law, not, what the Google lawyers or the AI lawyers are doing these days. I'm running into a lot of people who they talk to an AI lawyer and then they go, well, that's the law. And it's like, no, it's not how the law works, kids. But we have got Leslie with us today, and she joins us here on our big broadcast. And if you want to find us, we are available on BitChute, Rumble, Clout Hub, of course, CheekyJaguar.com. And so let's talk a little bit about this. Let's kind of set the scene here with you, Leslie. Trump's endorsement of Andrew Cuomo, which was a lifelong Democrat, and over a self-described socialist like Zohan Mamdani, stunned a lot of people. How did you interpret this move in the larger context of cultural and political polarization?
I don't think it's surprising at all in the broader context of sort of where the Democratic Party is going and where the base of the Democratic Party is headed. You know, when you compare someone like Cuomo against Mamdani, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Who knows at this point? I know there was a caller to the Alex Jones show one day who called him Zohan Damn Commie. And I'm like, oh my God, Trump should have stole that.
I'll
that is amazing.
I just keep screwing it up. Anyway, I'm not shocked just because of the...
Yes.
I think the ideas and the more zealous ideological nature of where the Democratic Party is headed. Cuomo's more, I think, your typical pragmatist. I think he's, more like kind of like a Biden. He'll align with the ideologues, but I don't think that's really the core of his political function. So whereas it's different for some of these diehard socialists, borderline and Marxist individuals who are now taking over the Democratic wing of the party. So I think it makes a lot of sense from that standpoint that Donald Trump would endorse Cuomo. Now, obviously, probably not his ideal candidate, but it's juxtaposed against the opposition. That's what I think it was really about. The reality that a Republican clearly wasn't going to win that race. So. Well,
yeah. And I'll tell you, honestly, after seeing videos on Curtis Siwa's all the stuff he does with his cats, and seeing about all the amazing things that he does, and hearing him debate these guys, I'm like, that guy actually likes New York. He probably should have been the mayor. So, meanwhile, you've got Governor Abbott's comment about a 100% tariff on New Yorkers moving to Texas, which is incredibly insane to me. This may have been tongue-in-cheek, but it resonated deeply with his base. What does this say about the growing cultural divide between red, blue, and America, essentially?
Well, I think it says a lot about how expensive it is to live in New York. And the amount that the government's going to really pick your pocket to live there. But this is pretty typical. People will eventually be priced out of certain markets and go, is it worth it for me to live here? Irregardless of their beliefs on other social or political matters, right? At a certain point, your pocketbook has to extend far enough for you to be able to put food on the table and put a roof over your head and have a reasonably decent standard of living. I think it'll be interesting to see what these shifts look like long term. I don't think they're going to make a lot of a short term impact, right? When you think about a bunch of people moving from New York to Texas, it's not going to make any short term impact. But if this trend continues, it might be interesting, something that historians would look back on and go, oh, there was so much migration occurring. I know that there's also a trend now where people are leaning much more towards living around people with similar ideological dispositions, and didn't used to be quite as much like that in the US. I think more and more people, if I recall the study correctly, some of the studies that have come out correctly, is that more and more people don't even have close acquaintances or friends that aren't of the same ideological or political persuasion. So I think politics in some ways is really starting to mirror what religion once was, where people really only congregate with people who by and large think like them. I don't think that's perfectly healthy for what it's worth, but there's obviously a lot more polarization than there has been in the U.S. politics in the past, and I think that the ideologies are diverging more and more. Right? We used to have polarization that was an offshoot of somewhat of a shared belief system, but I don't think we have that shared foundation anymore, and that makes it really hard to bridge cultural divides.
We have got a great guest with us today. Joins us live here on our big broadcast. Leslie Corbly is with us. So, are we witnessing the breakdown of traditional political alliances where ideology basically now trumps party loyalty?
Yes, I think so. I also think that we're seeing a realignment of politics because we don't really have the same political philosophies we did historically in this country. So, for example, when people talk about those on the right being conservative or the MAGA movement being conservative, I've always found that a little odd because when you look at Donald Trump's politics and the way he does politics, it doesn't really look anything like someone who is really steeped in conservative political theory. It doesn't, because that's not, he's really closer to a 1990s Democrat. I mean, he's very comfortable wielding power. J.D. Vance talks a lot about that, kind of this will to power and the ability to utilize government for good, which is obviously mechanisms of power. So I think that what we need to, in my opinion, we need to understand is first, the structure of government is much different than it was historically in America. Yes, we still have somewhat the structure of a Republican form of government that's limited and has self-governance, but the bottom line is the government is huge in comparison to what it was at our founding, during the Civil War, even in the 1950s. We don't really have the same structure of government. That's number one. Number two, increasingly, we are controlled in a lot of ways through digital surveillance and digital infrastructure, and that system is growing, not contracting. And there's likely not going to be any way out of that system for the foreseeable future because it serves those in power. That's just the way reality works right now. So I think those things need to be understood, and contextualizing what's happening politically and ideologically within those two frameworks is really important because, again, what happens culturally is not divorced from politics or ideologically. Like, how people shape their core values are determined by that. And the bottom line is that we don't have the same self-governance we did, back at our founding. And so these core values that have shaped America are not really experientially lived out any longer. And I think that creates a lot of issues with the public as far as understanding what those values are and believing they can be lived out in the modern day.
Back in here, there we are. Let's. Oh, I was having some technical issues on my end, so I'm like, well, we're just gonna leave the StreamYard and come back. It is just another day waking up in the vortex. That's what I tell everybody. We have got Leslie Corbly with us today. She joins us here on our big broadcast. So in Progressive Prejudice, you explore how toxic compassion and moral superiority drive social division. How does this reflect the current theme of the country, essentially?
Well, I think that, and this is broadly speaking in metaphors, I would compare the toxic elements of the right. If I were to think the right would become pathological, it would become pathological in a manner that looks more masculine. Overt power and control, we're going to do, a top-down government approach to ensure order, right? We're going to focus a lot on order. And I think that those on the left focus more on chaos. And their pathologies lean more in what would be considered more of a feminine direction of not having enough structure, not having any clarity of beliefs and focusing on, I care about you, but caring in a sort of, like I said, a pathological or twisted sense, right? So one of the most common, that's why I use the archetype of the devouring mother. One of the most common real world examples of the devouring mother will be with a disorder called Munchausen by proxy, where it's usually a mother, sometimes another female caretaker, but I think 98+% female, who use the caretaking of a dependent, usually a child, as a mechanism for self-aggrandizement. So rather than actually taking care of the child, they're using a facade or a guise of caretaking as a way to bring themselves attention or positive affirmation, whatever that may be. And I think that mirrors the really toxic elements of the Democratic Party right now, where they focus a lot on pandering to minorities or saying they really care about taking care of marginalized constituencies. And I think often it really is more about control. How do we maintain the control our party has on the nation? How do we maintain control of the population such that we can maintain the status quo of the power dynamic that we currently have? So again, it's right, the idea of government being a nanny rather than, I don't think that's the correct role of government, right? So it sort of infantilizes the population by making them constantly dependent upon government structures. And I don't think that's a good thing. I think to the extent that individuals at any point need to be dependent, they should be dependent on their local communities, churches, family members, people who are close to them, right? Who can help them become independent rather than sort of having this incentive structure, which is undoubtedly part of governance right now, which is there's an incentive structure to maintain on welfare, right? Rather than to be maybe dependent for a period of time and exit that dependency. So I think the Democratic Party, like I said, has more issues with the dependency control side of the spectrum, whereas the right, if it were to have a problem, I think would be more on the law enforcement control side, right? Not as much on caretaking.
That's awesome. We have got a great guest with us today. She joins us live here on our big broadcast. So you describe the devouring mother and as a cultural archetype. How does this idea apply to what's happening? Give us more details on all this. And
sure. So I think some of it is, like I said, the caretaking as a mechanism of control, and then it's also a mechanism of averting any kind of accountability. So what I mean by that is I think it's very taboo in culture right now to criticize women. I think it always to some degree has been, but especially on the left. And one way you can see that is through, there's such a dominance in the left with the idea of abortion. It's very dogmatic now. It's not like your 1990s safe, legal, and rare type commentary, right? It's very much we should be able to have this fundamental right to end a life in the womb from any point from conception up until now. I don't think I can think of a Democrat that has a limit that they will put publicly. I'm sure some Democrats do, but I mean, like, politically speaking, it's like kryptonite to put a limit on when an abortion should be able to occur on the Democratic Party, which I find fascinating because what it's essentially saying is that women have a sex-based right to engage in violence and to determine who lives and dies, which is traditionally a godlike authority, right? That was something a deity decides who gets to live and die. So while they focus again a lot on the compassion element of that, at the core, it's this belief that women have a just authority to determine who lives and dies, that they don't engage in indiscriminate violence, right? So the idea being that if a woman gets an abortion, it's for a just reason, right? That there's no such thing as a woman who might do that out of convenience, do that because of, and increasingly, I would argue, the more you push for abortion on demand, the more you get women who want an abortion for any reason or frankly just stupid reasons, right? So I think it's weird that but again, on the left, this is very controversial to talk about. You're not supposed to. And so I think that there's a philosophical element to that. And then there's also the belief that's very rampant among those on the left that women are fundamentally victims, right, of male aggression. And that women, and the idea on the left is that you don't ever really critique people who have victimhood status, right? The more victimhood status you have, the less you get critiqued. And so I think it really strips women of their agency because in my view, again, I think women are equal to men just because the power men and women have isn't equal. And by that, I mean, men have absolutely historically had a lot more power outside the home, but there's a lot of power in the home that women have traditionally had that is very much ignored as a power center. You know, women, frankly, this is no exaggeration. They quite literally frame the minds of children they frame the future by doing that. I mean, most caretakers are women, most educators are women. The children interface primarily, their authority figures are primarily female. And those females shape their formative years, which shapes how they behave later in life. So this idea that women haven't exercised that power historically is absurd. Now, obviously, that doesn't look the same as male power. But what I'm trying to get at is that we can very easily critique male power, and I think we struggle to even see female power as existing. It's like we don't really see it that way in culture. And so the idea of critiquing it is sort of taboo. And because it's taboo, it means that the harms perpetrated by women tend to be unnoticed, unspoken, unrecognized. There's not really a lot of language surrounding how to even talk about that. And I think that comes up a lot, like I said, in the abortion debate, but more broadly speaking, I think that children really struggle to differentiate their identity from their mothers more so than their fathers, right? They're sort of always distinct from their fathers, but not so with their mothers. And their mothers have this unique ability to give them a stamp of approval, right? You had value because I said you had value. Fathers don't have that kind of power in society. And so I just don't think that there's an appropriate discussion of what female-driven power and its pathologies can produce.
Well said. Good Lord, that is amazing. No wonder you're a lawyer. We have got Leslie Corbly with us today. She joins us live here in our broadcast. So this book, talk to us a little bit about the whole writing process of bringing this thing to life.
Sure. So it's actually it has two sort of themes that go throughout. The first is an autobiography of my belief formation process. And the second theme is cultural critique of progressive values. So the reason for that is that I don't think there's a lot of examples in culture of what it looks like for individuals that grew up on the margins of progressive thought. So the first word I remember learning was the word half aborted, because my mom would call me that. So I had a great mom. At any rate, but I found what I learned from that and what I really dealt with growing up was how I really was very cognizant of the hypocrisies inherent in progressive thought, right? Progressives focus so much on talking about how we shouldn't dehumanize anyone, we should love everyone, we should want, the best for everyone, all the sort of, kind of hippy-dippy love thy neighbor tolerance talk, right? And yet I was very well aware from a very young age that if I had talked to most people who are progressive, they would think I should have been aborted. And so I thought it was a very hypocritical movement. I didn't really identify with it at all. I thought it had a lot of moral inconsistencies that were not well critiqued. And so that's where the critique element comes through. It's kind of, again, to show that there's actually individuals behind the rhetoric of the left, and they struggle, I think, to see the humanity of the people who could be impacted by their ideologies because they're so used to externalizing that. They can very easily see who might be harmed by Christian doctrine, a religious or conservative thought, but they don't really self-reflect to understand that there are people who are going to be on the losing side of their ideology as well. And I think that's driving a lot of the authoritarianism on the left, is that they've never had a reason to self-reflect. And my hope is that we can somehow get to a point where they do self-reflect. My concern is that maybe the pendulum will swing too far right, and then they'll think, oh, look, we were correct, and then they'll feel a lot of self-aggrandizement and from that. But again, the bottom line is I think those on the right have been forced to self-critique for a very long time because academic institutions, Hollywood, journalism, law, education, pretty much all of that has been left-leaning for so long that it forces those who move through elite circles, if you're conservative, to think through your beliefs. I don't think there's a lot of friction for those on the left. They kind of get their ideology just constantly reinforced, and they don't really have to go through a process of understanding there's real people on the other side of your ideological beliefs.
We have got a great guest with us today, joins us live here on our big broadcast. So, Leslie, this book you've put together here, what do you want readers to take away from your writing of the book?
I think I want them to take away from the writing that everyone has prejudice. Prejudice is human. So this idea that some people can be beyond prejudice, which I think is what progressives have thought for a long time, is delusional. There's no such thing as someone who doesn't harbor prejudice. And you're going to harbor prejudice. Prejudice goes in every direction imaginable. And so the reality is that because prejudice is so human, the idea shouldn't be to stamp it out. It should be to understand where people's different prejudices come from in order to mitigate the damage that prejudice does, because it's not going to go anywhere. and we're always going to have to contend with it. It's part of what it is to be human. So humans have good aspects, there's good and there's evil, and we're a blend of both. And I think thinking that you have come to some ideological or religious position in society that means you don't embody negative aspects of humanity, including prejudice, it's just not how reality works. And so we have to be able to contend with that in a real way, no matter what our ideological dispositions are.
That's awesome. So Leslie, before we let you go, how do we get in touch with you on social media, websites, buy your book, everything?
Sure. So lesliecorbly.com is my website. You can go. I'm on Instagram and X. If you just type my name in the search bar, it'll pop right up. Both profiles are public, so very easy to find. And then, so just type my name in Leslie Corbly in the search bar. And as far as the book, you can find a link on my website, lesliecorbly.com, or you can go to Amazon and type either the title of the book, Progressive Prejudice, or my name into the search bar. My name will pop up the 2 books I've authored, and you can purchase them there.
Fantastic. Well, Leslie, I really appreciate you making time for us today. Thanks for coming on the big program and chatting with us today. You